All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. And Martyn, another full-on weekend of rugby league in both hemispheres. It's really starting to warm up ahead of the end of the season.
I thought there were some really exciting contests over the weekend, and there will be this weekend, of course, because it's the last weekend of action in the NRL before they go to the playoffs, and we're getting to that stage with Super League. Only 3 games left in the Super League regular season, so things are coming to the boil very nicely, aren't they?
Absolutely right, mate. We saw some standings changes on the ladder over the weekend, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But I guess we can get into it right now. Friday night's matchup: Leeds defeating Warrington 16 points to 12. Bit of controversy in this game as well, but quite a tough battle in that one.
Well, Sam Burgess was really upset that Paul Vaughan got sent off very early for a head, shoulder to the head, basically. He really fumed about it afterwards, and I've got some sympathy for him because it was one of those incidents that when you first saw it happen, it didn't look that serious. But the trouble is, when you then re-examine it, particularly in slow motion, it looks very serious. And of course, I've not spoken to Sam since the match review panel decision, but Paul Vaughan has got a 3-match ban, so he's going to miss the remaining 3 games of the regular season, which is obviously a blow to Warrington because, of course, without him they lost on Friday night. And I just wonder, Jake, whether we're getting to the point at which we've got to sort of ask some serious questions about this business of players being dismissed either through red cards or yellow cards, because all too often now we're getting games that are being played between teams of 12 versus 13. And ultimately that's not really a great thing, and it's likely to put fans off watching games, in my opinion. And I just wonder whether we need to review. I'm all for sending players off the field if they inflict an injury on an opponent's head. There's no debate about that whatsoever. But I just wonder whether we should get to the stage where that player who commits that offence is, banned from the rest of the game, but the other players can make up the numbers back to 13. I know it would be a controversial move, wouldn't it? And I've not thought through yet all the ramifications of that move, but I think we've got to look very carefully at it, because games in both the major competitions in the world are being affected now very adversely by players being off the field, and I think it's getting to a point where we've got to look again at it while preserving that principle of dismissing players who aim at who make contact with the heads of opponents.
And my gripe with this tackle is, how many times in a game would this type of contact happen that goes undiagnosed almost because the player hasn't been injured or hasn't lied down following that incident? Like, if you go back and you watch every single tackle in a match, that's going to happen 10, 20 times, I guarantee.
Well, of course, there are some people who, are claiming that Owen Trout, stayed on the floor to draw attention to that tackle. I mean, I would never make that accusation because, I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened and what Owen Trout was feeling as he got hit in the head. And certainly, if you get hit in the head, you might, justifiably stay on the ground for a while. But it's a very difficult one, and we're at this stage, aren't we now, in rugby league, where we're trying to get rid of head tackles in the game as a whole, and it's inevitably going to cause some problems in terms of the competitiveness of games when players are dismissed in the way that Paul Vaughan was. So I think it deserves examining to see whether there's a way that that can still be achieved, but without actually corrupting the game itself.
I actually was watching a show. It's a new show Channel 9 are doing in Australia at the moment, which features Billy Slater, Joey Johns and Brad Fittler, and they often get a guest on every week. And it must have been last week's episode, or it might even be an older one, but they had Warren Ryan on, who is...
Oh, gosh, really?
Yeah, Joey Johns was saying...
Coach.
His mentor sort of growing up. And what Warren said was he appreciated the way one of the greatest refs I've seen Bill Harrigan used to ref. He said that Bill Harrigan wouldn't dictate the game. He was there to sort of facilitate a result. Yes. The best way he approached the game was that, he was sort of to be seen in the background, not sort of being the front, I guess gaining all the attention by the big calls he was making. So I just wish that there was a way that the referees could find a way to sort of, not dictate the result of a game, but help facilitate.
Not have such a strong influence on its outcome. I think that's right. Important. And, and I'm sure the referees themselves would probably favour any move that, removed all accusations of effectively interfering in the outcome, which they obviously don't want to do. It's a hell of a job being a referee, isn't it? And, to actually have these, modified rules coming in where players have to be dismissed with a red or yellow card if there's contact with the head. It places a big onus on the referees to be consistent in doing that. I think in most cases they are. But it's a very difficult job, and but obviously Sam Burgess clearly didn't think that it merited a red card. So I can only imagine now what he thinks about it getting a 3-match suspension.
Yeah, especially when the following games I mentioned just before the episode, Sylvester Namo and Liam Horn were both given yellow cards in their match over the weekend. I looked at both of those sort of and compared it to Paul Vaughan's. Theirs are probably worse in terms of head contact. Not quite sure if they've received bans at all.
They have, yes. Both have received bans, but not for 3 games. I think one has got 2 matches, one has got 1, I think. Or maybe they've both got 1. But, yeah, not as severe, the punishment meted out to them. So, but both suspended.
So, I mean, on that case, on that basis, I guess I understand the frustration of the lack of consistency. I don't know. I think something needs to be done there, mate.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move on to the next matchup. We had Hull KR defeating Salford 32.
By the way, still on Leigh. Leigh are in the top 6 now, which after that win against Warrington, which is a fantastic achievement, bearing in mind they only won 2 out of their first 9 league games this year. They looked absolutely dead and buried, and Adrian Lamb has done a fantastic job. I mean, I think I said a week or 2 ago that the obvious coach of the year is Willie Peters, but actually Adrian Lamb has done an extraordinary job in getting Leigh into the top 6. The only problem for Leigh now that they've actually got into the 6, is to not relax. And if they're going to stay there, I mean, it would be very easy for the Leigh players to sort of think, we've made it into the 6. We're playing Castleford this weekend, which we'll talk about a bit later. We're going to qualify without having to do too much more, and that obviously would be a disaster for them.
Yeah, they need to keep their foot on the gas, that's for sure. And we just had a brief chat about it before the podcast. They've done a great job of making up that ground as quick as they did. I think you and I all year we've sort of been saying they have the squad to do it. It'll just be whether they have enough time to do it at the end of the season, and here they are with a few rounds
absolutely.
Spare. So we'll see if they can hold that position. Right, mate, we'll move on to the next matchup. Hull KR defeating Salford 32 points to 12. Another good win for Hull KR. Yes,
and without necessarily playing at their best. I thought they always looked likely to win that game, and it was I hate to sort of use the word routine, but it was almost a routine victory over Salford. They almost looked to me as though they were holding something back for the Wigan game this week, which we will talk about. But and of course they've retained their place at the top of the league with that victory. And it was I don't think it was the most exciting game we've seen at Craven Park, but it was certainly one that the fans appreciated, and it was a game. Jack Broadbent, actually, I was just looking for his name. He scored a couple of tries, and one of the characteristics of Hull KR this year is that they've signed good players when they've become available, and I really rate young Jack Broadbent very highly personally. I thought when he was a young kid at Leeds, he really shone, but then got some quite serious injuries. They signed Joe Burgess. Joe Burgess didn't play against Salford, but when he became available, and again, he's a real fine winger. So they've signed the right players, and that's so important when you're putting a squad together, isn't it?
Absolutely right. It's always like I'd love to know behind the scenes who's the scout or who's the one that's watching these other teams, thinking this could be an undervalued player.
Absolutely,
here,
yes. That's the art of doing the job, isn't it?
Yeah, no, they've done an outstanding job, and again, can't wait for this weekend's matchup, but we'll get into that later. Saturday's matchups, we had Castleford defeating Hull FC 39 points to 20. It was quite close in some stages of this game, but Castleford just sort of held out in the end.
Well, they did, and again, the Hull interim coach Simon Griggs was scathing about his team, and I'm not quite sure. I mean, to be honest, Jake, when a coach comes out and publicly criticises his team in that way, I'm not quite sure how effective it is to do that, really. I would, if I were a coach, I would always, try and adopt the mantra that I'll defend my players in public, but I'll give them a bashing in private. Once you get behind the dressing room doors and the dressing room doors are locked, then you can lay into your players. But I think to denigrate them publicly on TV or in the media and so on, I'm never sure that does a great deal of good personally. So I think and you sort of, and they didn't play well. There's no doubt about it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't tell the truth, but I think you ought to normally, try and be more positive and defend your players where you need to.
And it's not as if they got nilled, you know what I mean? They still put points on the board. I think everyone's, our expectations of Hull FC is that it's obviously a building year. Next year's going to be the big year where all the pressure is going to be on them.
Let's hope so, yeah.
So yes, we'll see. I mean, it's hard to motivate players too.
The bad thing about this game is what we've already talked about. Castleford have had two players, their two PNG players, Sylvester Namo and Liam Horn, suspended for the game against Leigh this Friday night. So that makes Leigh's task a little easier.
No, definitely. Moving on to the next matchup on Saturday, there we had Wigan defeating Catalans 26 points to 18. I guess.
And Catalans have fallen out of the top six and might not get back in it because, they've still got a massive injury crisis, and Wigan had Bevan French coming back into the side, and Wigan are getting their players back just when they need them for the end of the season, and Wigan always come on strong in the latter stages of the season, and they're doing it again. I think and they, it was 12-all at one stage at half time at the Stade Gilbert Brutus, but I always thought Wigan looked likely to win that game, and they did in the end. And Junior in Samba, he seems to me to be improving week by week. He's such a giant of a kid and just looked very, very difficult to stop. And I'd be very surprised if one day we didn't see him playing in the NRL for one of the big Australian clubs.
When you look at Junior in Samba, you just kind of feel like he's still got a little bit of filling out to do. Maybe he's such a big man at such a young age. But you still look at him and think he could probably still put on a bit more muscle or a bit more weight if he wanted to.
Well, he's an incredible prospect, isn't he?
Yeah.
And what a great young player he is. And I'd be very surprised if he doesn't feature for England against Samoa later this year.
He's going to cause some chaos if they
I
do
would have
pick
thought
him,
so.
I think.
Yeah, potentially, certainly.
Yeah, can't wait. Moving on to Sunday's matchups, we had Leeds defeating London 21-20.
My gosh, Leeds just kept their playoff challenge on track.
Yeah.
But, Brodie Croft, a late field goal in golden point time, and nearly at the end of golden point time as well. London... Again, it's just painful to keep saying it, isn't it? But what a shame that we're not going to see them in Super League next year. And what an absolute disaster that will be for the game, in my view, because I think, there's a crowd of 4,500 there as well, Jake, on Sunday. Just when they're managing to generate more interest, they disappear out of the competition, and it's just... pathetic, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. And I think a lot of the Leeds fans, 1 point win over London, they were quite disappointed with that performance. I don't think they thought Leeds should have even been in that position to begin with. No.
But, Leeds toughed it out and got the point in the end. But they don't look like a playoff side, do they, at the moment?
No. I must say...
great performance, by the way, by Reese Martin.
Yeah.
Who scored nearly all the points, apart from the field goal at the end.
Did he score a hat-trick?
Yes, scored a hat-trick and 4 goals as well. Yeah, so quite an incredible performance, really, and it's amazing to think that Leeds are losing him, isn't it? At the end of this season.
Yeah, and that Jack Campagnolo, he seems to be fitting in quite well there at London. He had a good game. He's
been a real sensation, I think, because again he missed a lot of the season with injury early on, and to be honest, I knew nothing about him. Really, when they signed him, but I think he's been a real good player. And will another Super League club sign him so he can stay in Super League next year? Who knows? But you would think that might happen, wouldn't you?
And just to think, like how good this London team could be in Super League next year with another off season together as a squad,
and
building
off
of
what
happened this year.
I think it's so desperately sad, personally.
Yeah, and to also think if they had have gotten the win over the weekend, that would have put them ahead of Hull FC.
It would, it would.
But, still a few games left. Anything can happen, I guess.
Yeah.
Moving on to the final matchup of the round, we had St Helens defeating Huddersfield 18 points to 10.
Yeah, Huddersfield winning 10-6 at half-time, but they got Fenton Rogers sent off just before the interval, and that effectively... did it for them. He's since been suspended for 4 matches, for 2 separate incidents in that game, 3 matches for one and 1 for the other. And it's just, Saints desperately needed to win that game if they were going to stay in the top 6. And they did, and they're back up to 4th now after Salford's loss at Hull KR. But, Saints are still looking shaky. It wasn't a totally convincing win, as the scoreline suggests, but they will be getting players back as the remainder of the season unfolds. So I think Saints will stay in the top 6 personally, and by the time the playoffs start, hopefully they'll be back to near full strength, and that will be a very different Saints to the Saints we saw at Huddersfield on Sunday.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. They might end up being a bit of a dark horse.
I think they could.
Time.
Oh gosh, well, it's the old saying, isn't it? We keep saying it on here: never write off the Saints, and that's one of the best pieces of advice you can get in rugby league, I think.
No, certainly. All right, mate. Let's take a look at how the Albert Goldthorpe medal table is looking after the week of matches. Not too much change, I guess, in the top 3. Mikey Lewis, he gained an extra 3 points, but he still sits second behind Mark Sneed.
Yes.
So Mark Sneed's on 26 points, Lewis.
He should be on 23 points there, actually.
Okay.
For some strange reason, that's come out as 20 and not 23, which is... So it's only 3 points behind Mark Sneed now.
It's getting
getting tighter.
Heating up, isn't it?
Yeah, it's getting tighter. And, and one other thing in the paper this week that I think is quite interesting, we had a reader's poll last week saying how many clubs should be in Super League. Mm-hmm. Should there be 10 to make it tighter? Should there be 12, which there now is? Should there be 14 or should there be 16? and we had a big vote on that readers' poll, and the winning figure was 14. 59.31% of readers think there should be 14 teams in Super League. And coming second was my favoured number, which is 16. That got 32.19%. Right. And trailing very badly, with only 6.15%, was 12 clubs, which is what we've got currently. And then even farther behind, with only 2.35%, was a Super League of 10 clubs. And I know a lot of people still talk about, let's cut Super League down to 10 clubs to sort of increase the quality. For God's sake, if you think that, read the results of that readers' poll. That's not what the fans want. And the fans want more teams in Super League, not fewer. And I think would be a very important thing for the Rugby Football League and RL Commercial and IMG and anybody else to take note of. Don't reduce Super League. In fact, don't keep it as it is at 12 teams, but look to expand it to 14 and then 16.
So how long is it now until the IMG grades will be
October? I think it's something like October the 23rd that they announced the grades.
Right after the championship,
yes,
isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Concludes. Yeah, because it'll be interesting to see the top 12 teams, obviously, and then how far behind that 13th and 14th team is. And
absolutely.
Also make our predictions into how long it will take them to achieve that.
Well, last year when they put those preliminary grades out, there was a clear gap between teams 1 to 14 and teams 15 to 35, whatever it is. So, you could justify going to 14 just on those grades that they issued last year. And I wish they would. I wish they would. Although, having said that, on that basis, London Broncos would still not be in Super League because, of course, they were only 24th in the rankings, which I thought was, very well. It certainly raised my eyebrows a bit. Put it that way.
Yeah, no, certainly, mate. I guess if you are watching the podcast on YouTube, leave us a comment. What sort of number of teams you'd like to see in Super League going forward.
Yes, yes.
Always nice to read those comments.
It is, yes.
The good and bad, mainly good, mate. We don't get too many negative ones.
No, well, you never know. We might do this week. Who knows?
Well, touch wood. All right, mate. Just on your column, you wrote it on a few different topics this week, mate. The first one, rumours still swirling around about the NRL potentially buying Super League.
Yes.
Just want to delve into what you sort of wrote about in your column this week?
Well, I mean, why would the NRL want to do that, I suppose you might say. And, obviously, I suppose the NRL is itself expanding. It's expected to expand to 20 teams in the next few years. And they do need to get to expand their supply of players who could play at that level. So on the one hand, you can say, well, the NRL, is would be acting in a very self-interested way to take control of the British game and facilitate, some of the better players moving to the NRL. I think that would be a very negative way, though, to look at it, obviously, and not something that we would want to see. We want to see our competition building up to the point at which it can genuinely rival the NRL. And that's the point. And I just make the point that the NRL this season has been in fantastic good health, hasn't it? The crowds have risen. At the weekend, the average crowd for the 8 games was over 26,000. And that's with some teams playing in stadiums that reached their capacity. For example, if Cronulla's capacity was greater than 13,000, they'd probably have got 20,000 as well. Yeah. And they were the only team that didn't get a crowd of over 20,000. So the competition is in fantastic health. The games themselves look fabulous when we see them on TV. They've even got this weekend the game between West Tigers and Parramatta, which is being called the Spoon Bowl because, the loser of that game will win the wooden spoon. The winner will avoid it. That game has already been sold out at Campbelltown Stadium. And that says an awful lot, doesn't it, about how attractive the NRL is now seen by the Australian public. And, we are a long way behind that, I'm afraid. And, of course, the one significant difference between us and Australia is that they don't have to compete against football. I mean, football is a giant over here, and it's a bit of a dwarf in Australia, isn't it? It's not a major sport in spectator terms in Australia. So it's a massive advantage not to have to compete against football. We have to, but we've yet to find a way really to do that effectively, I think.
Yeah, it's obviously exciting times for the NRL, and just on that, the Spoon Bowl, it's great that they are getting a sellout, and I can't really think of many years in the past where it has come down to that final round and that final match up to decide, and obviously both teams don't want to be...
Well, I hope West Tigers win it, personally, because I've got quite a soft spot for West Tigers, mainly because of Benji Marshall. I was such a fan of his when he was a player, and I always... think that when you see Benji now as the coach, he always comes across really well as a really genuine guy. And it's his first year of coaching the West Tigers. I mean, it's a chaotic club in many respects because of that merger between, Western Suburbs and Balmain. And they've still not, they've been merged now for more than 20 years, but they're still not really... neither of them have really come to terms with it, which causes a lot of problems for Benji and the administration. But I'd love to see them get off the bottom, because they were the bottom team last year. Get off the bottom this year and then make a bid for the playoffs next year.
And another great crowd in Brisbane to watch my Broncos
more than 50,000
spiral out of the finals race.
Yeah, that was a Dolphins home game, wasn't it? And but what a great performance by Herbie Farnworth. 2 tries, several assists. Just his performance was absolutely outstanding for the Dolphins. And we made him our Player of the Week this week in League Express because of that. We very rarely give that accolade to an NRL player, because obviously it's mainly we're looking at domestic players. But because Herbie, of course, is an Englishman and has been playing so well for the Dolphins, we did it this week, and it's well deserved in my view. And what a great game this weekend, Newcastle Knights versus the Dolphins, to see who finishes in 8th place and gets in the playoffs. It's really worked out well for those two sides, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely, mate. And Newcastle obviously fighting to stay in the 8, but like from last year, the Warriors are missing out, the Broncos are missing out. If Newcastle can make it, that'll be a great effort from them.
Absolutely, yeah.
And one of your other points, mate, you sort of spoke about Super League's branding. We're giving off the wrong message.
We always do. Branding is something that is designed to reinforce your identity and make people want to associate with you. And yet, what do? We have clubs that very often wear jerseys that have got no relationship to their, supposed club colours. So, a club like, for example, Huddersfield, claret and gold, 2 of the most iconic colours that should be in the game. Yet how often do you see them wearing those slightly dirty-looking green shirts, that have nothing whatsoever to do with claret and gold? And I'm not picking on them, because most of the other clubs, are just the same, really. If you're going to have separate away shirts or separate shirts for special occasions like Magic Weekend, don't forsake your colours. I mean, my colleague Tim Butcher, who writes the Rugby League Yearbook, had a letter published in League Express last week pointing out how many clubs played in the Magic Weekend in colours that made them unrecognisable. And that's just crazy. But it's not just that. We don't, if you look at Rugby League on television, the game is played on a bare pitch with no pitch markings to indicate that this is a Rugby League game. You look at the NRL and the pitch markings are there on the, the grid lines, 30 metres, 40 metres, halfway and so on and so forth. It's very clear when you watch the NRL that you're looking at a rugby league pitch. It's not clear when you watch Super League games on Sky TV that you're looking at a rugby league pitch. There's no, and for example, the shirts that players wear, there's no commonality that shows that they are Super League jerseys. I mean, for example, if you watch the NFL, NFL, uniforms tell you straight away it's the NFL. Everything about it is, coordinated to sell the brand of the NFL. The NFL. There's virtually nothing that we do that sells our brand, either as a sport or as individual clubs.
Yeah, and there's certainly ways that clubs can do, different versions of jerseys, but still sticking to their original colours.
Absolutely, yes.
I think like Warrington this year, they did one where they had like a retro jersey. It was just sort of, referring back to a year in their past, and it was a different design. I remember going to that match and seeing heaps of them in the crowd. So, it's not as if people
the thing is,
buying.
That's right. The thing is that you can define a club by its colours. I've already said claret and gold. We all know who that refers to. Warrington, primrose and blue. Wigan, cherry and white. St Helens, the red V. It's just you can often do that with clubs, and Castleford, black and amber. Leeds, blue and gold. It's and they should be emphasising that, not taking attention away from it. And it's very frustrating for me.
Yep, and the War of Roses has been a topic of conversation over the last week or so, Matt. I know Sam Burgess had some comments about it in his press conference, I believe, or an interview.
Yeah, he wants to bring it back. IMG apparently want to bring it back. I think it's a non-starter. It was abandoned in the early 2000s, basically because of a lack of interest. You can't replicate state of origin with Yorkshire and Lancashire. That time has gone. At one time perhaps you might have, but it's no longer there. And you can't really... It's a retrograde step to define rugby league as being played purely in Yorkshire and Lancashire. In Australia, New South Wales and Queensland are the two major states playing rugby league. But in over here now, our ambition should be to get players from all over the country playing the game, not just from Yorkshire and Lancashire. And there isn't the feeling, in Queensland, and you're a Queenslander. It does seem to me that everybody hates New South Wales, or at least maybe hate is not the right word, but it's a case of everybody in Queensland loves nothing more than to put one over New South Wales.
Yeah.
And with many people, the feeling is replicated on the other side. But over here, it isn't the same. I mean, at one time, we used to have Yorkshire versus Lancashire cricket matches and in the county championship. And, Old Trafford or Headingley would be packed out. They're not anymore. Because there isn't that same feeling about them. So, and you can't bring it back. Once a feeling's died, you can't bring it back, in my view. So, let's think of something more creative to focus on rather than bringing back what's really a dead concept.
And that feeling, do you think that's more of a social feeling that's sort of died down, or just in strict sports terms, there's not that rivalry anymore?
No, there isn't that rivalry anymore. As I say, I don't think there is, and I don't think it would be worth interrupting the Super League season to bring back a Yorkshire versus Lancashire game. I don't think it would draw crowds. I don't think it would draw a big TV audience. And just as importantly, I think you would find a lot of players dropping out of that game who were selected, urged by their clubs not to play. And you're asking for trouble.
Have there ever been any other alternative concepts that have been thrown up that could have some merit?
Well, one suggestion I made, and again I'm not sure about it, is having a game between England and the players who qualify for the Celtic nations. England versus Wales, Scotland and Ireland. You could even add France to that, I suppose. England versus the rest in a sense. Again, I'm not sure that would go, but I think that would at least be an alternative that might have more meaning, because making it England against Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, at least then nominally would have appeal to the whole of the British Isles, whereas Yorkshire v Lancashire would nominally only have appeal to people in Yorkshire and Lancashire, and then probably not even then. So that would be my suggestion, but it would need an awful lot of work to sort of test it out, market it, and try to decide whether it would really work or not. But that would be my and of course it would act as a sort of great trial for Great Britain, wouldn't it then? And but who knows? It's not on the horizon, isn't it?
No, bigger fish to fry as well. In the short term.
Yes.
Now, moving on to International Rugby League, we had some news. Jason Demetriou, he signs on as the Kumuls coach. Still not sure that he's sort of been linked with Huddersfield as well, but we're not sure what's going to go on with that.
Well, I can't imagine.
Position.
I mean, would he still be the PNG coach if he took the Huddersfield job as well? Who knows? He might be. I think he's I think he's a good appointment for PNG, and I think he would be a good appointment for Huddersfield Giants if they appointed him. But who knows? And I mean, it's an exciting prospect, isn't it? The Pacific Cup and the Pacific Bowl this year, and he's going to be involved in that with Papua New Guinea. So. Quite an interesting prospect, I think.
And we did see the fixtures announced for that one. You can read about those.
Yes,
in
we've got
League
them here.
Express. But I think one of the points that was made that International Rugby League's returning to Sydney for the first time in a few years, which caught me by surprise.
Yeah. At Combank Stadium, the final, which is actually going to be a quadruple header because it'll be the final of the Pacific Cup, the final of the Women's Pacific Cup. There'll be the promotion relegation playoff between the Pacific Cup and the Pacific Bowl, and the same thing for the women as well. So it's that's going to be quite a day, isn't it?
Yeah.
Put it in your diaries. Sunday the 10th of November.
And hopefully those kick-off times are friendly for the UK audience.
I should hope so, yeah. I'm sure they will be.
It'd be great to see.
Yeah.
Mate, now, we had a bit of controversy in the Southern Hemisphere surrounding Elliot Whitehead over the weekend.
Yes.
Mate. He's come under a bit of fire for a hip drop tackle.
Yeah. And he's been banned for 3 games, hasn't he, I think?
Yeah, which
ends his career in the NRL.
Which is quite sad. But what did you see the vision of the hip drop tackle?
I did, and he did land on Brandon Smith's legs, and Brandon Smith has suffered a very serious injury from that. So that idea of a hip drop tackle, and I think Elliot Whitehead made the point that it wasn't a deliberate thing, but it's one of those things you've got to go out of your way to try to avoid. It's not good enough to say it wasn't deliberate. It's like hitting the head, isn't it? Very often players don't do that deliberately, but nonetheless you've got to go out of your way to avoid it, and it's the same with hip drop tackles. And I mean, obviously he had a bit of a spat with Trent Robinson. He tried to go over to Brandon Smith after the game to apologise, and Trent Robinson more or less sent him away. and Trent Robinson made the point that Elliot has been found guilty of hip drop tackles in the past on several occasions, and it's a habit of his style of play. And if it is, then Elliot's obviously coming to Catalans next year. He just does need to get that out of his system.
It's one of those ones where you watch the replay. It was a one-on-one tackle. It looked like Brandon Smith had sort of surrendered, and then Elliot Whitehead waited for him to move before he sort of affected the tackle, and it just happened so fast.
Oh, they always do these things,
don't they? Certainly wasn't intentional.
No.
So, yeah, it's a bit of a tough one. Sad to see that's probably how his career in the NRL is going to end.
Well,
but
but he's been a great player for Canberra Raiders. Having said all that about him, he's been a fantastic player, captain of the club, and so on. And and what a great asset he's been to them. Morgan Smithers is the other English player who's playing for them at the moment, and I think Morgan Smithers has played in every single Canberra Raiders game this year so far, which is quite incredible. Incidentally, they play. They are just outside the top 8, and they play the St George Illawarra Dragons this weekend on Saturday. And it's an interesting one because whoever wins in Newcastle versus the Dolphins will end up in 8th position. But if it's 1,000,000 to 1 chance, but if Newcastle and the Dolphins draw after golden point time, then the winner of the Raiders or the Dragons versus the Raiders will then finish 8th.
Right.
And they play that game before the Knights and Dolphins. So as long as there's a very small chance of qualifying, they will be highly motivated to win that game, won't they?
Well, anything can happen.
Oh, you never know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it'd be.
Well, we nearly got Leeds and London at the weekend in Super League, finishing as a draw after golden point time. Yeah. So, it could happen, and you'd be a fool to write it off.
No, definitely. Moving on, mate. Oh, yeah, we touched on it briefly earlier, but Rhys Martin signing with Hull KR, it's been confirmed now.
I said earlier, Hull KR make great signings, and that looks like another one. Not least because of Reese Martin's goal-kicking ability. That's obviously not his only ability, but he's going to be a real asset to Hull KR, and I'm amazed that Leeds have not re-signed him to a longer contract at Headingley,
especially after the weekend's performance.
Oh gosh, yes,
God, he looked good. Anything else you want to touch on before we get into this weekend's matchups, Martin?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered quite a bit of ground there, obviously. So. Let's have a look ahead and see what's going to happen this weekend.
Oh, I'll just quickly get your before we get into the Super League, the Spoon Bowl, mate. Who are you picking in that one?
West Tigers, definitely.
Yep, definitely.
Although I'm not confident that they're going to win.
Yeah. Eels had a decent.
Oh, I'll tell you the other thing. The other thing we've not talked about, I don't think, is Carl Felt. We talked about him last week, I think, didn't we? Yeah. So they've confirmed that, and. He's going to be an interesting signing, to say the least.
Sounds like, from all the commentary I've seen online, the Saints fans are quite happy with that signing, as they should be.
I'd have thought so.
But yeah, and he brings a goal-kicking ability as well for them as well. So
absolutely.
I'm really looking forward to that. And they've got some good recruits coming in next year, the Saints. So,
oh gosh, yeah.
Positive signs. All right, mate. Friday night, we've got a potential Super League Leaders' Shield playoff. I think, will this decide?
No, it won't, because there are still 3 games left, aren't there? So it won't decide it, but it could go a long way to deciding it, put it that way. And, it's going to be a hell of a game, I think.
Who do you like in that one?
Oh, Wigan, I think. I think Wigan are coming strong at the end of the season. They actually, the only bad performance Hull KR gave this year was in the Challenge Cup semi-final when Wigan beat them easily at Doncaster. And I think Wigan might do it again. I think they might just be a bit too strong in the middle of the field for Hull KR. But, I certainly wouldn't be surprised to be proved wrong. And, I'd be very happy to see Hull KR win the League Leaders' Shield. I think they've done so much great work this season and in previous seasons that I think everybody in rugby league would actually congratulate them if they did manage to pull it off.
And this is the week which will really show them what they're made of.
Yes.
This will be the great test. They've had all these great wins week after week, but this will be the real test for them. So, I can't wait. Moving on to the next matchup, Leeds taking on Hull FC.
Well, Leeds need to win it to maintain their playoff challenge, and I can't see them doing anything other than winning it. Hull are a bit dispirited. Hull are still potentially challenging for the bottom place in Super League, and I think this will be a convincing Leeds win again, and probably with Reese Martin scoring more points, I would imagine.
No doubt. Moving on to the next matchup, Castleford taking on Leigh.
Well, Leigh have got to win this game. We were saying earlier that Leigh have now got into the top 6, and they can't afford to relax now that they're there, particularly when you bear in mind that they've got 2 pretty tough games. Their season ends with them playing St Helens at the Leigh Sports Village. So they've got to get a few points in the bag now. And I think, and especially with Castleford losing Sylvester Namo and Liam Horn, I think this will be a bit too much for Castleford. Yeah,
every win is vital this time of the year, and Matty Moylan returned over the weekend? Yeah, that
Yes,
great
he did,
cover
yes.
tackle
He
on
did.
Matty Ashton in
He
the
did.
corner there.
He did. What a player. Yeah.
He's playing really well. Moving on to the next matchup. On Saturday, we have Warrington taking on St Helens.
Well, Warrington without Paul Vaughan. I still think they probably should win because Saints will still be under strength. But I think that's going to be a really great game to watch as well. So, I wouldn't like to... If I'm going to stick my neck out, I'd say Warrington by 6.
Okay, and that's at Halliwell Jones. So, yes, I'm sure Warrington, being a Saturday afternoon game, hopefully the conditions are nice and sunny. They might get a good crowd to the stadium.
You might even be there yourself.
Yeah, mate, I'll try and get along. And then we have Salford taking on Catalans.
Well, another crucial game, really, because Salford can't afford to lose again now. They're only, 1 point ahead of, a couple of points ahead of Leeds, with an inferior points difference. But Catalans desperately need to win to get back into the 6. So, this is a game that could go either way, but I would imagine Salford must be the favourites to win it. I think I'd go for them to win it by 10 points.
And I'm sure Mark Sneed will be out to have a good game after he's seen Mikey Lewis closing in.
Oh, yeah, well, of course.
Goldthorpe medal. So,
absolutely.
He'll need to have a big game. And then moving on to Sunday's matchup, we have Huddersfield taking on London.
Well, you would imagine Huddersfield would get back on track and win this game, but I noticed, by the way, that Chris Hill has announced that he's going to leave at the end of this season. So you would think Huddersfield would win, but London are a very determined side. They're determined not to finish at the bottom, and I think they could potentially shock the Giants. So I'll go for London by 4 points.
I mean, if they can play the way they did last weekend,
Absolutely.
I'm sure there'll be a chance.
Yeah.
All right, mate. Well, that's the preview of the matches for this weekend. Anything else you want to touch on before we sign off, mate?
I think we're all pretty much fixed. League Express front page this week, so still in the shop. So go out and buy it if you possibly can, and we'll look to reconvene next week. Absolutely. To talk about what's likely to be a very exciting weekend in both hemispheres.
Yeah, and if you are watching us on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. And we have been putting the QR code up on the screen. If you do want to get your online subscription, you can just scan that on your phone, and it'll take you straight to the site where you can get your issue or subscription.
Lots of great reading. Yeah.
And I believe you're about to jump on a press call with Willie Peters.
Indeed,
in about 15 minutes' time, mate.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
It'll be interesting to see what they have to
say.
Will.
Yeah.
Throw him some tough questions.
Of course.
All right, mate. We'll wrap it up here and do it again next week.
We will. Thanks a lot, Jake.
Thanks, mate.